Um, and I'm going to turn it over to our guests. I'm so excited to learn. Oh, I should ask Monica, and are you guys okay with us asking you questions? Should we do it in the chat all at once? Do you?
It's a small group, so certainly go ahead and ask.
Okay.
Yeah, this should be informal. Yeah.
Perfect. Thank you. Well, with no more ado, we can't wait to learn the.
Yeah, well, I mean, gosh, you guys know quite a bit about asthma already, so this should be fairly easy. I think we were able to introduce ourselves. You know, I hope no one missed introductions, but I'll just do it really quickly. My name is Monica Pagia with the EPA. I have my colleagues here who will be co-presenting with me, Sheila Betka and Megan Gavin. I serve as the asthma program coordinator for Region 5 EPA. Sheila is one of our technical experts on indoor air quality. And Megan is our environmental education coordinator, and she works on our Healthy Schools team. We already answered this question earlier. So, you know, do you have asthma or know someone who has asthma? And we all said yes to that question. So that's 100% of us know someone or has asthma. And then this is an outline of what we're going to be covering today. Sheila will be giving an overview of indoor air quality, and then I will be getting more into the specifics on asthma, what it is, some of the statistics, the physiology, so basically what's actually happening to the lungs during an asthma episode, and then discussing some of the symptoms. We are going to be focusing on managing environmental asthma triggers, just because I think, you know, as educators and even, you know, those of us who have asthma, this might be one of the easiest things to control. And then we're going to cover some best practices and policies that schools can do to better manage asthma for their students and staff. Megan will then talk about some of the resources that folks can use to teach kids. So I'm going to let Sheila go ahead and take it away for the next couple slides. Make sure you're unmuted too, Sheila.
Thank you, Monica. Hi, everybody. I understand from Deb and the team that some of you may have participated in some earlier training on indoor air quality. This is just, next couple slides is just a reminder of some things about indoor air. And I think we all discussed early on about the statistics that we spend on average 90% of our time indoors, and kids also spend a lot more time, especially very young children, spend up to 95 to 97% of their time indoors. And, you know, I think we're learning now even more that some of us are spending a whole lot more time indoors. During the summertime, obviously, there was a much bigger effort with the pandemic to focus on outdoor activities, was great. But since we're indoors so much, we really want to maintain that indoor environment. The indoor air sources that we typically encounter, we lump them into whether they're the pollution comes out as gas, or there might be particles into the air. And so when we're focusing on maintaining indoor air quality, there is no, you know, number, or, you know, when somebody says, how, you know, what is good indoor air quality, we can't say, well, if you keep pollutant X at such and such concentration. We don't have those types of standards. Different people are trying to identify a variety of things, but we know how to maintain the indoor air quality to have it healthy. And the biggest one is always controlling our indoor sources, as well as trying to control the outdoor sources that might be coming indoors. And so I have that graphic up on the right-hand side, and people are probably wondering, well, what is that? And this is those 4 boxes are representations of how we describe managing our indoor environments. And that first top left box is an indication of how we manage the pollutants that might be coming out. We try to get rid of them. We try to do source control where we might not introduce them. We don't want smoking in an environment. We try not to use certain chemicals in an indoor environment. We might try to stop buses from idling outside of the classrooms so that they don't get, the air doesn't come in, the emissions don't come into the classroom. The proper ventilation is important if you can't control those indoor sources. So the representation on the box on the top right, or the representation of the box on the bottom left, are examples of different types of ventilation. The top right box is our general building ventilation. We're introducing hopefully filtered outdoor air coming in to reduce the concentrations. The bottom left box is an example of exhaust ventilation, where you may have a source that is producing a lot of pollutants and you actually have the pollutants getting drawn out into a fan and getting exhausted outside. If you can't control the pollutants and if you you don't have enough ventilation, a third option is using proper filtration and or air cleaning. The filtration is important if you put it in any sort of ventilation system, but then there are these standalone air cleaners, and that's the bottom right-hand box showing how some of these filtration systems work where they capture the pollutants. Some of them have other problems associated. Some people have been trying to promote ozone generators in the past because of chemicals, and the ozone reacts very quickly. But then there's the concerns of being exposed to ozone itself or the chemicals that are secondary products from those reactions. Other things about maintaining indoor air quality include proper humidity. You don't want it really too dry in an environment. It gets your respiratory system, your nasal passages, if it's too dry, get cracked. You may, it may expose more environmental pollutants, viruses into your system if you have those openings. If it's too moist, too high of a relative humidity, over 60% relative humidity, there's the opportunity for mold growth. And then proper temperature and other factors should be maintained. And a lot of that has to do with the perception of indoor air problems. If it's too hot, people are uncomfortable. If there's too much noise in an environment, if there's too much vibrations, people become much more sensitive to the indoor air they have found. Next slide, please. So the health effects that we associate with indoor air quality problems include irritation of the eyes, nose, and throat. That could be things like volatile organics. It could be mold. Headaches and or dizziness is also similar. Particulates, volatile organics, mold. Fatigue is often associated with too high of levels of carbon dioxide. And if you recall, the sources of carbon dioxide are us. And it's not so much that it's a health symptom, but it does impact our productivity. Monica is going to be talking more in depth about asthma, but we have other respiratory diseases that are impacted by indoor air. Heart disease is an issue when certain of the chemicals that we might be encountering or certain particles that are really small get into our bloodstream, and that can actually impact our heart. Cancer. And I reference non-health related impacts, including productivity. If the carbon dioxide levels are too high, if we don't have enough ventilation bringing outdoor air in, the people don't do tasks that they know as quickly, or people have harder time sometimes thinking and taking tests. A lot of studies have been coming out with that. One of the things our children's environmental health special program manager often drills into all of us, that children are not little adults. They're more susceptible to air pollution than adults because biologically, humans aren't adults until about age 25. And the children, our lungs are developing as children. These environmental impacts, these exposures will affect our health, our respiratory systems and other systems much differently than as an adult. And I think the next slide, Monica, you're taking over.
Thank you, Sheila. Okay, so here's the definition. You know, we talked about what is asthma. It's a chronic disease of the lungs airways that causes recurring episodes of breathing problems. Chronic means that it lasts for 3 or more months. It can develop at any age. I know that was a question. It really, anyone can develop it, but it's more likely if there's a family history, if there's a history of allergies, if you live with smokers, or if you live in urban areas where there's more outdoor air pollution. There is no cure for asthma, but with proper management, it can be controlled. And unfortunately, it is still potentially life-threatening. And the question came up earlier also, is it contagious? So it is not contagious or communicable. So I have a question for you all, and just feel free to chime in. What do you think the percentage of children who have asthma is? Is it 3%, 7.5%, or 22%?
22%?
Okay. Well, the
I
correct
think 7.5.
Yeah, the correct answer is 7.5.
Wow.
Yeah, I mean, it's not quite as high as you would think, considering how many of us know someone with asthma. And this is national data, so numbers could be higher or lower depending on the state or the specific city you live in. Both children and adults, it's roughly 8%, so that's 1 in every 13 people. So if you have a class of 26, you'll have at least on average 2 children who have asthma, right? Females are more likely to have asthma than males, and that's true for adults, but in children, males or boys have a higher prevalence of asthma. And then in terms of race and ethnicity, you'll see that the Black community does have a higher prevalence of asthma. We talked about the deaths, it's still being, potential issue with folks who have asthma. And in 2018, there were over 3,000 deaths due to asthma. So that's on average 9 deaths per day. I have to move my little box here so I can read this. Over 50% of children with asthma have had 1 or more asthma attacks in the past year. And then in 2016, children, this is again nationally, have visited the ER for more than 500,000 times due to asthma. And I do want to note that CDC does gather their data. There's usually like a 2-year lag simply because they have to collect it and quality assure it before they post it. Okay.
Monica, I'm so sorry.
Yep.
Can you repeat what you just last said? I find it stunning.
The data?
Like the
yeah,
review.
So there's a 2-year lag because they have to collect it and quality assure the data before they actually post it, for the public to see. Yeah. And then here's some more data. Unfortunately, they weren't able to get the 2018 data up here to show it, but it gives us an idea that more than 13 million school days were missed. This is 2013, and more than 14 million work days were missed. It costs over $3 billion in losses. And actually, I feel like this number is lower than the actual number. And then, the question, your essential question that you asked, asthma is the leading cause of school absences from a chronic illness, followed by, I believe it's oral health and behavioral health. If you look at the graph, so the bars represent the millions of days that were missed from, kids that missed school. And then on the right hand, it's not incredibly clear, but I did look at it closely. It's the number of children with asthma that missed school due to that. So it's like nearly 50% of kids with asthma missed school because of asthma. And here's a cool picture. So this is what's happening. This is a cross section of a bronchiole in your lung. On the left is a normal airway, and on the right is a asthmatic airway, I guess. Oh, there's three general things that are happening. So you can see those muscle bands kind of around the airway, those tighten. When the lung gets irritated, it produces thick mucus. And then also the lining of that lung, you can see it's really inflamed on the right side. So it's the bronchoconstriction, so the muscle tightness, the mucus forming, and the inflammation. And I'm hoping that we can watch this YouTube video. If I click on it, if I'm screen sharing, hopefully it'll pop up. But let's see.
It should. We may have to fix the volume, but we should be able to see it.
Can you, hold on a sec. Can you guys see it?
We can see it.
Okay. Can you hear it? Did you hear the music?
No.
Huh.
So here, it's simple to fix. So go ahead and unscreen share.
Okay, stop sharing.
Stop sharing. That's right.
Okay.
Then you're gonna go ahead and click screen share, and at the bottom, there'll be a thing that says share your video.
YouTube.
Yeah.
YouTube. Okay.
And don't do the optimizer. That one is like, that makes it crazy.
Okay.
Okay.
So now you can see it again, right? Okay. So let's see if we can hear it.
You
It's
have
weird.
to actually, so if you pause it real quickly, so on the bottom of your Zoom, there should be a more option with the 3 dots. And you click on more and then hit share computer sound.
Does she need to stop screen share? I don't see the 3
Oh,
dots.
here. I see some more. It's on the top of mine. Sorry.
Yeah.
Thank you,
sorry.
Alicia.
Yep. Yep. No
Yeah,
problem.
perfect.
Yep. Okay.
Share
And then if you hit
computer
play, yep, share computer sound. Now we can hear it. I think. Well, we got to play.
Let's rewind it a little.
And that affects the
There it is.
airways in the lungs. The airways are tubes that carry air down deep into the lung. When you have asthma, the walls of your airways become inflamed. This makes the airways sensitive. The airways react strongly to certain irritating things that you breathe in. This reaction makes the airway muscles tighten, and much less air flows to the lungs, making it harder to breathe. Cells in the airways may also make more mucus than normal. People with asthma may experience wheezing, coughing, shortness of breath, and chest tightness. They may also wake up at night coughing and short of breath. When the symptoms get worse, that's called an asthma attack. Asthma affects people of all ages, but it most often starts in childhood. In the United States, about 25 million people have asthma. That's 1 in 13 Americans, and 6.2 million of those people are children. Asthma is a long-term disease that can't be cured, but it can be controlled. Most people with asthma live normal, active lives by taking a proactive role in managing their disease.
Okay, so now I'm going to go back to that presentation. So that's just to give you a really quick overview. Okay, so now you can see my slides, correct? Okay. I'm going to go to the next slide. Common symptoms, as you heard from the video, coughing is very common. I think people don't, unless you know someone with asthma, I don't think people really think of that as a common symptom, but it is quite common. Shortness of breath, chest tightness, and fatigue. And I have itchy chin or throat and stomach ache because children will typically describe their symptoms. You know, maybe they might not even know, you know, it's an asthma attack coming. but this is something that they'll complain about. So that's just something to keep in mind. And then some more serious symptoms. You have the moderate. Quick relief medications don't work or last long. I know the ones that my children take usually last about 4 hours. And then inability to do usual activities. So for example, in PE class, if they're not able to keep up with the children, that's something where they may need to use their inhaler. Increase in cough or chest tightness and wheeze. It's that mild whistling that you hear when someone's trying to breathe. And then more severe symptoms, just severe shortness of breath, difficulty walking or talking. So not just like usual activities, but basic activities are really hard to do. Paling, so the color of their skin changes, or their lips turn blue or gray. Their nail beds also change color. So these are all indications that they're having severe symptoms. And then retractions. I put the definition here because when we were going through this, Sheila and Megan were like, what does that mean? So that's basically when someone's really having a hard time breathing and you can see the skin getting sucked in, at their neck and at their ribs. Components of asthma management. So comprehensive asthma management involves medical management of asthma, so diagnosis, proper treatment, and education. I don't have a medical background. I just know what I have to do to keep my children healthy. I think generally there are the medications that we use. There's one for, it's a daily inhaler, and that actually helps with the inflammation part. And then there's the quick reacting inhaler, which is something that folks you'll see, I think, usually on in movies and TV. It's what patients take to relieve the muscle tightness. You saw those muscle bands tightening, so those actually loosen the muscles. And then environmental management of asthma, again, improving awareness, which we're doing today, and then just reducing exposure to those triggers. And we're going to go really in depth on some of these things. Again, here's a list of common asthma triggers. It's not a comprehensive list, but they are the more common ones. And it's also important to keep in mind that everybody has, their own unique set of triggers. So this doesn't necessarily apply to everyone with asthma. It's important to those who do have it to know which ones are their triggers and ways to control them. So common triggers: animal dander, pests, dust mites, mold, nitrogen dioxide, and then secondhand smoke. And I think, most of this was already mentioned earlier. And then other bronchial irritants from chemical cleaners, maybe some school supplies like art supplies, glue and paint, things like that. We talked about fragrances, and then other particulate matter and volatile organic compounds. So ways to manage animal dander. So first of all, animal dander is the protein that comes from the skin cells, saliva, or waste of warm-blooded animals like, dogs, cats. I think in this cage, it's hamsters or gerbils, birds. And in schools, the most effective way to reduce this is to remove these animals from the school. And I think, most schools don't allow animals anymore inside, but I know that Megan and Sheila have recently been to one where they still do. So if that's the case, it's important to have an animal policy. So don't let them just roam around. You want to make sure you're cleaning their cages regularly, keep them away from the ventilation systems, keep them off of anything upholstered or carpeting. And then, of course, those who are sensitive, keep them away from the animals as well. And the same goes for in your homes. We recommend, if someone's really allergic or having asthma attacks due to their pets, maybe find them another home. And I know that's really hard for a lot of people to do. So then the next best thing really is to keep them off the furniture and to keep them out of the bedroom and especially off the bed. And actually studies have shown that this does really help, because if you think about, you're sleeping in your room a third of your day. So
And so this is Megan, sorry, I was gonna just, so Monica thought it was gerbils, but it is chickens.
Oh, are those chickens?
Yeah, and so Sheila and I were at a school in Michigan, and Sheila controlled her reaction about like, oh my gosh, you have chickens in your classroom. So we're like, wow, this is really cool. You have chickens. What's the ventilation situation? And right when you walked into the room, I mean, not even getting close to the cage, just the animal smell. I wouldn't say it was bad, but it smelled farm-like. So obviously it was an example for the students. And so whether the school has that or not, I think it goes back to making sure there's proper ventilation, or if this, if that students have asthma, maybe keep them. And again, I'm saying something that is probably not easily done, is trying to keep them out of that particular classroom. You don't want them to have their inhaler and having, suffering the whole time. But yes, it is chickens. Chickens are other.
Thanks for clarifying that.
Fowl, yeah.
Now I know.
Now you know.
Sorry, can I just chime in for a second? We also had chickens, but at our house, and before we had a dining room table, we had them in the dining room, and they create the biggest mess. So the second round, we just got chickens again this year, and I was like, they need to be out of the house. They need to be in the garage, because there is just endless amounts of dust, and I don't even know what else, but I can definitely testify that they are a mess.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, so cleaning is really important, and vacuuming regularly. Again, especially when those who are sensitive aren't around. And I do also want to make mention, especially for those teachers who have students, that in a classroom eventually, is that a lot of times too, this pet dander is brought into the classroom from the students on their clothes and backpacks and stuff like that. So you just want to be mindful of that as well. And Sheila and Megan, again, just jump in if I've missed anything. So cockroaches and pests. So we're talking, pests. So we're talking about like mice and rats. It's the proteins again, and the waste products and saliva of cockroaches and allergens from the other pests. It's also like, the dead body parts of the cockroaches that get picked up into the air that folks are allergic to and react to. The best way really to manage this is by controlling the water and food source and any entryways that they're getting into the building. You want to use integrated pest management, and that basically focuses on pest prevention and the use of pesticides only as needed. So generally the 4 practices are: you want to look for signs of pests, you see any droppings, make sure there's no food or water or garbage exposed. Again, remove the pathways and shelters. So shelters meaning like if there's a lot of clutter and there's a lot of places for these bugs to hide, you want to make sure that you don't have that. And then again, use the pests, the controls and the baits only as needed.
Monica,
yes.
Isn't carpeting a trigger also?
It is, and we're going to talk about that in the next couple slides. No, that's okay. Absolutely right. But it's not the carpeting necessarily in itself, and we'll get to that. I do want to mention one last thing about pests. When we do our indoor air quality walkthroughs at schools, one of the things we do look for is that the dumpsters aren't up against the building or near any doors, because then that can also lead to pests getting indoors. You want them away from the building. And so here, we're going to talk about carpeting. So dust mite allergens, these are microscopic bugs that feed on dead skin cells. And they like soft bedding, they like mattresses, pillows, carpeting, anything that's fabric covered, like furniture and stuffed toys. Ways to reduce these things. Obviously in the classroom, you want to really limit the amount of these things in the classroom. If you do have pillows, make sure that you're using allergen impermeable pillow covers. And, mattresses also, you can get those for mattresses as well. You want to vacuum regularly using a high efficiency filter. And then when you do this, you want to make sure that it's, again, when there's no one who's sensitive around. And then dusting as well. You want to do that often using a damp cloth so that you're capturing the dust, you're not kicking it up back into the air. And these also apply for, in the home. When you do wash anything, that has soft fabric, you also want to make sure that you dry them completely, because dust mites also like kind of the moist environment as well. Does anyone have any questions at this point?
Hey, Monica.
Yep.
I did a walkthrough at a daycare in Wisconsin, and I've heard this as well, that they put stuffed animals in the freezer.
Yeah. So that actually will kill the dust mites, but they'll still be in
the freezer.
They'll still be on the actual like stuffed animals. So that's why.
Oh, okay. So there'll be dead dust mites on the stuffed animals.
Yeah, correct. So we do recommend, I don't know, maybe shaking them out would help, or, I always throw things in the dryer. Even
I think what I was hearing was, and I'm laughing to myself because I think they put them in a Ziploc bag in the freezer. Does that make sense? Like they're not going to just put them in.
Right. Of course.
Probably. But yeah, so now you're giving me the heebie-jeebies, that it's dead. It's dead dust mites that are frozen. Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay, so you'd still need to vacuum, or you'd still need to put them in the dryer to get them off. Okay.
Correct.
Thanks. Thank you.
Okay, and then mold is a big one. I mean, not only is it an asthma trigger, it's just a general lung irritant, even for those who don't have asthma. And mold is everywhere. So it's in your house right now. There's really no completely removing mold. I guess the problem is it's when it becomes abundant and you can start to see it or smell it. And mold really can grow anywhere where there's moisture and oxygen. And they like temperatures, between like 40 and 100. So you really have to be mindful of this. You want to control this by controlling the moisture, controlling humidity. If you see indications, like here in this picture, the ceiling tile that has moisture damage, there might be mold behind it. So those types of things you want to check. You want to fix the moisture problem. If there's a leak, fix that. Clean any moisture. EPA recommends that you can actually clean off mold of an area that's 10 square feet or less by yourself. Anything larger than that, we recommend professionals to come in and then do that. And you can just use hot soapy water. Bleach definitely works to kill mold spores, but again, bleach can also trigger asthma. So if you're going to use bleach, don't use it around those who have asthma. And then ventilate as well. Let's see. Yeah, again, you can't always see it, but you can sometimes smell it. Again, and if you do notice moisture somewhere in the building, in your home, it is important to take care of it quickly. And then if you see mold on like porous or absorbent material, you want to make sure that you actually remove and replace it rather than just try to clean it up, just because it's going to be really difficult to get all those mold spores out, and they'll likely just regrow.
Monica, can I ask a quick question?
Of course.
So the top right picture, at that point, does that all just need to get removed? Like the whole drywall, all that stuff needs to be completely, there's no cleaning that, is there?
Yeah, if that's drywall, you definitely have to just replace it. Yeah. But if it's like cement, I think you can probably clean it off. But that, I'm not sure where this picture was taken, but I pulled it off our EPA website. So. And then nitrogen dioxide. So we talked a little bit about coal earlier, but this is natural gas. And it comes from, I think a lot of people don't know this, but it comes from stove, gas burning stove. Yeah. And also wood, so fireplaces and stuff like that. Comes from emissions from vehicles, power plants, off-road equipment, or off-road vehicles as well. And this is also just a lung irritant. Um, I always think of it, and I'm not quite sure if that's the smell I'm smelling, but when you turn on your burner and it doesn't actually light up and you smell something. But if that, builds up, that can actually irritate your lungs and then, irritate asthma. So what we do recommend is that indoors you use your exhaust fan when cooking. Whenever, even if you don't smell it, you need to have your exhaust fan on and make sure that it's venting to the outside. Again, when burning any fuel appliances. You've all heard that we should never use the stove to keep warm, the stove or the oven if you're using gas. Use the manufacturer's instructions, and a key term you'll hear throughout this whole presentation is just ventilate. Make sure you're properly ventilating. For outdoor sources, I always think of like school buses and the car rider line in schools. It's ideal to have an anti-idling policy. I just think of the little kids too, their breathing space is right kind of where those tailpipes are. So, just keep that in mind as well. We did, in Cincinnati, we did help, the city with their anti-idling policy. So, and then additional strategies near road exposures that may work for schools. I know Sheila's working on a vegetative barrier project. So there's certain things that you can do. Obviously, anti-idling, you want to make sure that no one's idling in front of entry, doors or air intakes, those types of things. And we do have some resources here listed on the bottom, if you're interested in more of that stuff.
Hey, Monica.
Yep.
Monica was just touching on it, but she mentioned buses, but also with the anti-idling, it's if there, we visited schools and they don't have buses depending on the size of the school, and so the parents or the whoever's picking up the kid is, they want to be first in line, and so they get there and then they just idle no matter what time of year it is, and depending on what the situation at the school is, if it's urban or suburban or, whatever the parking lot situation is, that, Monica was saying is that, whether the kids are standing next to a car's tailpipe or the bus's tailpipe, but also just having a bunch of cars waiting for pickup, just idling isn't healthy either. So.
Yeah, it's generally just bad for the environment. So yeah, I know some school districts, they have that idling policy in place until it hits a certain temperature, of course. Then, obviously it's okay to keep your cars on to keep, people warm inside their cars. And I think this is a given, right? Environmental tobacco smoke, also known as secondhand smoke. It's the smoke that comes off of the burning end of a cigar, pipe, or cigarette. It's also the smoke exhaled by the smoker. It contains over 4,000 substances, many of which are carcinogenic. And again, it's just particularly harmful to young children. And this is because, we mentioned earlier how asthma can actually be caused. So if a child's constantly exposed to secondhand smoke, it can actually cause the onset of asthma in young children. It also makes asthma attacks more severe. And besides asthma, it also increases the risk of sudden infant death syndrome, more ear infections, pneumonia, bronchitis, and other lung issues. And this is generally what we tell folks. Again, you want to enforce a no smoking policy. I know in Illinois, it's a statewide policy that you can't smoke in public and commercial buildings. And if you do smoke, it has to be 15 feet away from an entrance, air intake, or a window. Regular training and education on the harmful effects to both staff and parents. Have smoking cessation resources available. And then for those who do smoke, of course, ideally, they should quit, but until then, smoke outside. And we do recommend, especially, if there's daycare teachers who work with small children who smoke, that they use a smoking jacket. So this is something you wear only when you're smoking, and then you remove it so that you're not bringing in what's called third-hand smoke on with you, inside with you, and then you're holding and handling small children. I do want to mention vaping really quickly. It is kind of an emerging issue. I don't have a slide on it, but it is, EPA has yet to do some research on it, but CDC, has the same stance that vaping in itself has the same effects that exposing yourself to secondhand smoke does. So, it increases inflammation in the lungs, it intensifies asthma symptoms, and it increases the risk of developing chronic lung illnesses like asthma. So, teenagers, I know it's very popular among them. So I'm always on, my teenagers' case, like, don't even try it because it's you're putting something into your lungs that's not supposed to be there, basically, and you're just causing more harm. Chemical irritants, again, we did touch on this earlier. A lot of you guys talked about, fragrances, so air fresheners, cleaning supplies sometimes have really strong fragrances. We always recommend using cleaning supplies that have the safer choice label on them. Maybe in art classrooms, you'd have paints and adhesives. Pesticides, again, use integrated pest management. But pesticides can also be referred to as like Clorox wipes. And this is, those are scented as well. You don't want to use those around sensitive folks. And, we really do emphasize that children do not handle them. And if you are using them, read the instructions on how to best use them and always wash your hands afterwards. Air fresheners, we don't like those in classrooms. For the very, reasons that were mentioned earlier, for those who are sensitive, it can really irritate them and trigger asthma. Personal care products, I think of like hairspray or maybe nail polish, those types of things should be used in a ventilated area. So maybe like in the bathroom with a fan on, again, away from those who are sensitive. And I did mention, so some of the things, you just use different products. Make sure those who are sensitive aren't around. Make sure you're reading the instructions carefully, and then ventilate, ventilate, ventilate. Other common asthma triggers, viral respiratory infections. So things like the common cold or flu can certainly exacerbate asthma symptoms. That's why I know for those of us, who have asthma or live with people who have asthma, they really stress the importance of getting a flu vaccine. Just because once you do get sick, the symptoms get really bad. Changes in weather. So like in the spring, right, there's more pollen in the air, or like right now in the fall, there's more mold in the air because of the trees, and the dead leaves and the moisture. Local outdoor air quality, if you live in an urban area or in a more industrialized area, there's going to be more outdoor air pollution. We do have an app that you can check daily for outdoor, outdoor air quality. And I even think, like, I know on my phone, the weather app that I use, they do have, it does tell you if the air quality is good or bad or moderate. And also like on the West Coast where there's a lot of wildfires, local outdoor air quality has been really, really bad. So in areas like that, we just recommend you don't even go outside and you keep the windows closed. You make sure that you're filtering your indoor air regularly. We mentioned pollen. And then someone else also mentioned exercise. There's actually such a thing called exercise-induced asthma. So folks, that might be their only trigger. I know my oldest daughter throughout middle school and high school, she was on Cheer and Palms. And whenever she would go out and perform. Before she actually performed, she would use her rescue inhaler as kind of a preventative way to make sure she doesn't get her asthma symptoms. Endocrine factors. So the endocrine system is what releases the hormones. And I've heard studies of folks who maybe their asthma gets worse or better, after puberty or during pregnancy or during menopause. Those types of things can certainly trigger asthma. And then strong emotional reactions. And this is true too. I think it has to do with something with your breathing patterns. So if someone's laughing really hard or if they're crying really hard, it can also trigger asthma symptoms. So that was a lot. Here is just some best practices, and we already kind of covered some of these and recommended policies. There's a lot of asthma-friendly checklists online for schools, and we also have one that we'll share with you later. It's used to basically assess and reassess either your own personal classroom or the school in general. It's important to provide training to staff and parents. Again, clean when those who are sensitive aren't around, and then check daily air quality and pollen counts. Recommended policies. So every person who has asthma really should have an asthma action plan, and schools should have a copy of that. Schools should also use integrated pest management. Teachers might want to develop their own parent-teacher communication plan, not just for asthma, but any other kind of health issue the student might have. Establish a smoke-free campus. So we talked about the 15 feet rule, but some schools and some campuses are completely smoke-free, so there's no smoking at all allowed. And then establish anti-idling policies and anti-fragrance policies as well. And I just wanted to show you, and here's an example of an asthma action plan. There's usually a green, yellow, and red. And at the minimum, these plans should have a list of the students' triggers, what medicines they're taking and how to take them, what to do if they're having asthma symptoms, and when to call the doctor. And again, I know in the school that my children attend, the school nurse usually has a copy of this and then shares it with their teachers. And this is easy. I just kind of wanted to, ask you guys, what is the best way to manage asthma then? Is it by taking your medications as directed, avoiding or reducing exposure to asthma triggers, or is it both A and C? Anyone can chime in.
Both?
Correct. So I mean,
a
that's
lot of answer C.
Yeah, so the lesson is here that, we did talk about a lot about the triggers, but medical management is very important too. So, we talked about there is no cure for asthma, but with proper control, and control meaning taking your medication and reducing exposure to triggers should help manage one's asthma. And again, we know this is very idealistic. Everyone's asthma is unique and really should be treated as that. And then this goes back to Sheila. Sheila.
Thanks, Monica. So Monica gave a great overview on asthma and the triggers. And the last session was talking about the controlling the sources. And so if you recall back to the beginning slides where I was talking about managing indoor air quality, and the big three that we typically focus on in indoor air is, controlling the pollutant sources. And then if you can't always control the pollutant sources, then we also focus on ventilation. So we just kind of wanted to touch on some ventilation issues in the next part for a little bit. Okay, great. And so Monica talked about asthma, and the graphic on the left where you've got the two images, cartoon images. The further left image is of a lung system that's open and clear and assuming that the cartoon figure is breathing easily. The figure on the right shows constricted bronchial and the constricted respiratory system having trouble breathing. So if the thing that we want to focus on with this next section is the fact that buildings are like lungs in the fact and that they breathe. And Monica, can you click again? So the far right image is of an example of one type of ventilation system in a school. And we want to keep the air flowing, both in our own respiratory system. And so, you know, we always want to make the conditions, we want the person with asthma, we want all of us to be able to breathe easy, to be able to keep the air flowing in and out. Our ventilation systems in schools and in our homes, and mostly we're going to focus on ventilation systems in schools. They have mechanical systems where we're drawing in outdoor air, we're conditioning it, meaning we're heating or cooling it, but then we're exhausting it. And we don't want to constrict or restrict that flow of air. So we want to keep everything breathing inside these buildings. Next slide, please, Monica. So here's an example of what we used to, I'm a biology undergrad as well as engineering. So we had a comparative anatomy class. And so I kind of think of this as a comparative anatomy of a respiratory system versus our HVAC system. And HVAC stands for heating, ventilation, and air conditioning. And this is an example of an HVAC system in a school. And it's very similar to our respiratory system. We want to deliver air to the final destination, and we want to be able to exhaust it. So if you look, you see we have air intakes and we have air exhausts. That's similar to our nose and mouth, bringing in air, exhausting the air. Okay, again, you don't want anything to impede it in there. Our lungs, number two, over comparing to our HVAC system, is similar to the mixing chamber. We're bringing in this air. There's some air that's coming back from the classrooms in the HVAC system, much like there's some air returning from the cells, and this comes and gets mixed in our lungs. The heart is similar to a fan. So both number threes. The fan is bringing that air through the system. It's drawing in air from outside. It's taking the air from the mixing chamber and it's delivering it somewhere. The heart is doing that same thing. It's allowing the lungs to deliver that oxygenated air to the system. Our air supply ducts, usually this is a general system. This would be the ducts that we see up in the ceiling. If you have unit ventilators in classroom, the mixing chamber and the ducts would kind of all be together in that little unit. But basically, that air duct supply that's delivering the air from the mixing chamber, similar to the arteries, bringing that oxygenated air to our cells. The ultimate location, our school classrooms, where we want some air being delivered to the students, to the teachers. Very similar to the cells, our organs, getting that same necessary blood. The return air, similar to our veins, going through the air duct return, and then ultimately getting exhausted outside. Again, comparing the two systems, very similar. We don't want to block the flow. Next slide, please, Monica. So these were just examples of how we're blocking the flow or impeding the flow of where air should be going, or some of the exhaust air as well. So the far left hand is an example of a unit ventilator in a classroom. And we know that schools have very limited storage space. And so we're finding any flat surface becomes a storage space. And this is a unit ventilator that's supposed to be delivering outdoor air into the classroom and conditioned air, heating, cooling into the classroom, but it has become a shelf and it's blocking it. So I guess one of the things that we would recommend is first take off that stuff, but then also you would want to check that ventilator afterwards once you remove all that stuff, because things might have dropped in because you've been storing it. Often we're finding people have plants on there, so water starts dripping in there. There might be mold growth. Pens and pencils and homework assignments get shoved in there sometimes. So again, we want to stop the blockages that are happening in these ventilation. Monica, can you click once? Okay, the middle slide. This is a school where they have a dryer, a gas dryer. And Monica mentioned about combustion appliances creating nitrogen dioxide. Also, since it's a combustion appliance, carbon monoxide could be, as well as the particulates that you find in your dryer, your lint. What's happening here is somebody either was repairing the dryer, or they intentionally thought, oh, we're going to have more moisture introduced, so we're going to unplug the ventilation, the exhaust vent. Not a good thing. You want to make sure that that keeps flowing outside. You want those pollutants. Monica, can you click again? Okay, now what this is, and this is a way that somebody jerry-rigged to purposely stop the flow in a classroom. This is a air vent that's delivering air to a classroom, but it's probably a very cheap air vent, and it's blowing directly on somebody, whether it's the teacher or the students. And they jerry-rigged, and instead of talking to the facilities person, they've jerry-rigged something by putting socks up there to stop the flow of the air coming directly on. So this is where the communication aspect of dealing with ventilation, you're getting too much air and it's bothersome. Well, it's probably because they don't have a very good vent distribution. And if they spent a little bit more money, they could get one that moves more, distributes the air thoroughly across the system instead of straight down. So that is just part of the communication in saying, okay, our ventilation is too strong. So next slide, please, Monica. So this is just an example, a communication tool that we've pointed to teachers when they're saying, I want to make our classrooms healthier. We want to be able to identify, there's a lot of things going on. So this is a checklist that has come from EPA's Indoor Air Quality Tools for Schools kit that goes through some of the things. And a lot of these, if you take a close look, and if you, we can direct you, I think it might be listed in the resources that Megan will be covering shortly. But Monica, a lot of the things Monica covered in her discussion about asthma triggers show up on this checklist. Talking about the general cleanliness and vacuuming, animals in the classroom, the drain traps in the classroom. The reason that's of interest is because some of the classrooms that might have bathrooms, or the special purpose classrooms that may have a lot of sinks, like laboratories or showers, the emergency chemistry showers, they'll have drains in the classroom. You don't want those drying out because you will get sewer gases, which, it's not, it's more of an irritant. Some people get nauseous and sick from it, but that's, concern. Excess moisture, we talked about mold and all the different indications of what to do. Thermal comfort, I just went over briefly the ventilation. Monica talked about the irritants, and we find that a lot in some of the educational supplies. Again, I talked briefly on local exhaust, which was like the dryer, but Monica also showed an image on her discussion for the nitrogen dioxide. That was in a school that we had visited where there were, it was a home ec class, and there were a lot of stoves in there, gas stoves, and they had no direct exhaust outside. It was just being cooked, there were like 3 of them, and they felt, oh, we were able to maintain it with the general ventilation. It really needs to have a local exhaust in that situation. And then locker rooms. Next slide, please, Monica. Okay, and Monica also talked about the different triggers, but and again, they're not always obvious triggers. The far left picture is, we've got a classroom where they were using corn as in textile, it was some sort of activity with counting or textile. The uncontained material, it would be a sign for me that this is going to attract pests. It needs to be contained. It needs to be cleaned up. It shouldn't be something exposed for, longer than the unit that they're using it. Next, can you click again? Okay, in the middle slide, this was a basement classroom, or it was a basement library, I'm sorry. And when we walk in, I'm not seeing mold, but I see a dehumidifier. I ask, well, why do you need a dehumidifier? It's likely it's very high relative humidity. If that, it looks like they're controlling it with using a dehumidifier, but you'd look around, you'd try to smell, you'd ask whoever's in there. So if somebody does have asthma and mold as a trigger, if it's not controlled as well, it might be something that you want to consider not having somebody with asthma in that area if mold is their trigger. Click to, that's an indicator of a thermostat. Typically, we talked about temperature being for the indoor environment, that you want it comfortable. That, because the bookshelf is right next to the thermostat, you're not getting as big of a area to have it detect what the temperature is. So that might be something that you say, well, if it could have the bookcase a little further away so that there was more air passing over that, so that you get it's better reading what is going on in the environment. I'm not as concerned about that, but it is something that somebody had pointed out to me. So I just wanted to point that out. Click again. So, okay, you see a bunch of buckets in an area and you're thinking, you see it off in the distance, you don't know what's going on, but you go and look, and inside that bucket, you can see the water being collected. And in fact, if you looked inside of each of those buckets, which our colleague had done, you will see water in each of those buckets. Those are buckets that are the system to collect the rainwater coming from the roof. And the sad part is that roof was supposedly repaired like 6 months earlier. So there was still a water problem, and this was the way they decided to address it. So I think the next slide is for Megan, and I think we're transitioning. Yep.
Yeah, so I just wanted to take, so we've thrown a lot of information out at you, and this is the end of the presentation. There's a couple slides, but this has been a real casual atmosphere, but does anybody have any questions so far on the material that Monica or Sheila has covered before we talk about the resources? I just wanted to check in.
It was really enlightening and very well done.
I'm learning about pregnant pauses doing virtual, even just talking to people of like count to 5. And so, so I'm going to pretend that I paused and Deb chimed in. So we're going to move on a little. So this resource is for educators. So these 3 things are all available online that you can print off. And certainly when we're back in the office at some undetermined time of year, we can send these to you. We do have hard copies, but for now, you can always share the links with your students. EPA isn't high tech enough that for the Asthma Trigger Fun Book that you can actually color it online. It is a printable document that you would have to color the old fashioned way, not on your computer. But so that's for younger kids. Older kids might be amused at the mazes, but the younger kids are, like that there's a goldfish named Dusty that has asthma. It's relatable. The other two documents on both sides are, one of them is managing asthma in the school environment, and Monica did touch on that of checklists. If the child does have asthma, there's checklists in there. And then for home visitors, also the one on the right, that one's actually interesting. I think it's 3 or 4 pages, and it talks about different rooms of your home and what to look for the triggers in the different rooms of your home. So instead of just having that first page that talks about common triggers, it talks about where in your home you'd actually find the triggers. So those are all available to print off or to reference. Next slide, please. Okay, so we've been talking about triggers, and we've talked about indoor air quality. Sheila was touching on it. And so this resource, I don't know if anybody's heard about the school flag program. US EPA has a flag program. It's not just for schools, it's for businesses as well. I believe Illinois Environmental Protection Agency also has some sort of flag program, but they have, as you can see, the screenshot that Monica posted is the air quality in the classroom curriculum. They have sample announcements. Again, we're going to pretend that you're in a hybrid school or there's some in person, but there's sample announcements for that you can make on the PA system, or that you can put in a parent letter. This is talking about what Monica mentioned earlier, is on your phone, or there is an app that talks about the air quality. Typically in the summers in our area, we have ozone action days, and it talks about, don't fill your car up, at certain times of day, or don't mow your lawn. And so, when we were talking earlier in the presentation that certainly asthma symptoms could be exacerbated by weather. And so this is a whole toolkit. There's some coloring things for younger kids, but there's also some activities for older kids. And then on the far right, the chameleon, there is a lovely storybook called Why is Cocoa Orange? And this is about outdoor air quality. And there's also online games too, which are fun, about, the chameleon changes colors based on your air quality. So green is good. And, as the kids in the picture, when you go down the line, red is bad. And, purple is really bad. We don't usually have purple days. But that is, the fun thing about Why is Cocoa Orange is that, it's good to read to young kids, but it's also good to have, the readers to actually read it, themselves. It is about chameleons, so you can have it for different age groups. So this is the air quality flag program. It's not just for schools, but there are a lot of lessons of things that you can do in your classroom, or actually you can adapt them for a virtual world. Next slide, please. Okay, so these are a bunch of websites, and since you're going to get the presentation, you can certainly click on them. There is that asthma fun book. The last one under elementary is this very, very catchy noattacks.org ad. If you watch it, you're going to start humming. It's cartoon. Monica knows that we found out about it, I started watching it over and over. It's very catchy. It's fun for the younger kids, but it's also maybe, the middle schoolers might just be amused at how, kind of silly it is. And so those are all available for you. I did want to touch on I was thinking about this, that you were mentioning during the modeling, there are videos, and you can just Google them, about pig lungs, like a healthy pig lung. And the videos that we found, they're different lengths, but it's talking about like a smoker's lung. And EPA does have a set of pig lungs. And in the non-virtual world, when we're actually going out, to schools and meeting with real live people, we can bring these out and demonstrate them to you. Monica and I have demonstrated them to multiple groups of kids. And one of the common questions that we get is, Was the pig smoking? Like, did that really happen? How did you get these lungs? And so it is, it's a good visual. There are YouTube videos on that. The two YouTube videos that are on this page, they're both TED Talks, and they're different lengths. And so they're not government, but it is, they're very clear, and they're good resources. There's also just some general resources from the Chicago Asthma Consortium, as well as American Lung Association. And so the other thing that I was going to mention was for an activity, when Monica, Sheila, and I met with Deb and her group, we were talking, Deb's going to start laughing. So an activity that, you could always make a video of yourself or creatively do it with your kids. The caveat is you don't want your students who have asthma to do it. So the idea is that somebody or everybody would do a bunch of jumping jacks or jump up and down for 30 seconds to a minute, and then you'd have a straw. And so the idea is that a non-asthma, I don't have asthma, and I've done this with Monica in a science, with kids. And so I've, done jumping jacks, and then I blow into a straw, and it gives me the feeling of how when an asthmatic has an asthma attack, that they're, everything is constricting and it's very hard for them to breathe. By me exercising and breathing through a straw, you can really feel it. One of Deb's colleagues, he sarcastically said that he was going to pass out when he did it, and we warned him. So I would say if you do that straw activity, I would be mindful and be careful. There's different size straws that you can do it with, and so even if you do it with a wider straw, you still get a feeling. And so that's something. Also, Monica has models. Monica, do you have the model at home? Oh, you do. Okay. So we have models that, certainly you could borrow. And Monica, do you want to reference the model?
I don't know. I'd have to look at where we ordered them from, but they're fairly inexpensive. And basically, again, it's a cross section. So this is like a healthy normal airway. This one, you could start to see the mucus forming in that one. So this one has the mucus, this one here, the mucus and the inflammation. And then this has all three: mucus, inflammation, and then the muscle constriction. So it's kind of a cool, hands-on thing that kids can see. And it does describe it here, like what's actually happening.
And I'm sure there's, videos about that as well, but we do have, the models that you can borrow, or as Monica said, they're low cost. So if you were going to focus on that, to get one and to pass it around to your students, what's nice is when Monica was demonstrating it, it wasn't just one thing, there's 3 or 4 different things, and it's a good visual for both students and adults.
The other thing that, and I don't know if Sheila wants to say more about this, but we do have an air sensor loan program. I believe one of the teachers mentioned that they have their own in their house, but this is something that we lend out to organizations, to other citizens, and certainly teachers if they're interested in using them.
Sure, thanks, Monica. Yeah, we can send a flyer describing, and our sensors, I think somebody said they have the Aware, and I believe that might do volatile organics. Our sensors primarily are just PM, particulate matter sensors, and they track the different size categories of particulate. And I know we didn't have an example of that, and if we come back for a future discussion on indoor air, we can show how the different size of particulate matter compares, and how that, but ours primarily are the very fine and smaller size particulate matter sensors, which is what gets into your lungs and can get into your bloodstream as well. So yeah, we have that loan program. Thanks, Monica.
There one slide, or that's the ending slide, Monica?
Yes, we have just our contact slide here.
Oh yeah, so the other thing that I was going to mention is this made me smile that Monica, when she was showing Sheila and I this presentation, because many years ago, we had a contest, and this poster is one of the entries to this contest. And so, you know, a thought is, you know, there's all these different themed environmental months. You know, there's a Children's Health Month, you know, there's Earth Day or Earth Month. And so certainly the great thing about this poster contest that we had, and it was for kids throughout the Midwest, is, you know, you can integrate the art, you know, kids who are good with art, and not, you know, and it's not, you can do science and art, and so you can do kind of a cross curricular. And I know this PD is meant for K through 12 and not one age group or the other. So this is something that multiple subjects could certainly get into. And, you know, again, in an in-person classroom type setting is, you know, you could do this sort of contest in any way, shape, or form, you know, with just one class or with multiple classes. And then you could showcase the art around the school, or you could have, you know, the principal be one of the judges and really, you know, get involved. And I think, you know, the prizes could just be minimal. Again, in a non-COVID world, you know, it's like a pizza party, or you know, it would almost be funny to repurpose like a trophy. You know, this past holiday season, we did some games with my family, and I repurposed a trophy, and the winner of the games got the trophy, and they thought it was really funny because it was, you know, very kind of kitschy and repurposed. And so I think Deb's laughing, so I think maybe adults would think that's funny. I don't know if kids would think it is. They might not think it's cool. They might think it's kind of boring. I don't have kids, but I'm speculating. But I do think you can get creative. And so, as Monica said, those are our contact information. But with the poster contest, it's another way of integrating the theme into your classrooms. Or teacher contest would be funny too. Yes, Deb.
And so that's the end of our presentation. If anyone has any questions, please, you know, feel free to ask. Or Deb, if you want to chime in and wrap up.
Yep. Does anybody have any questions, or while you have the experts here? I never realized or thought about buildings being lungs. I never thought of that before. It's so true. And I liked the model that you guys had, which everybody will get a copy of this PowerPoint, but I don't know if you guys noticed, but the two models, the one where it was the human system and the building system, I thought would be really cool models for somebody to use in some lesson that you guys are doing too. That's pretty cool. But I don't know if anybody.
Actually, I do have one quick question. So right where I used to live was a pond, like right in my backyard, and it was a fairly sizable pond. And around the end of summer going into fall, there was always a lot of algal blooms surrounding that, and then it ended up smelling like natural gas. And I'm just kind of curious, because is that a potential trigger as well? Because I felt like my husband and I kept on getting some sort of reaction from that. I don't know if it's probably because it just smelled bad to us, but I'm wondering, is that a potential trigger?
I mean, I don't know specifically if that is, but I mean, obviously, if it smells really strong and you are reacting to it, it could be, right?
Yeah.
We generally say any kind of strong odor that triggers someone's breathing, problem or allergies or anything like that could certainly be an asthma trigger.
have you guys, in the slide that you had the flags, the color flags, have you ever experienced, and I know you might, Megan, I think you said not in maybe our region, we've gotten to purple, but in what regions have you seen purple?
Well, yeah, and I don't, so in,
The West Coast right now.
The West Coast during the fires, the
Yeah.
wildfires.
right, during the wildfires. And there is on that Air Now website, and it's just airnow.gov, you know, within that website, well, you can put in your zip code and see what the air quality is. And, you know, it shows a map. And during the wildfires, I mean, yes, happily, you know, we don't have those, but even people within, you know, Chicago, it was affecting us as well. You know, you might think of, gosh, that's the West Coast, or now it's Colorado, but it does drift to the Midwest. So it is neat to, and that's another thing that you can also integrate into your classes. Yeah, the skies were gray, exactly. That you can integrate in your classrooms of, you know, what are the effects of the wildfires, and, you know, why were the skies gray in Illinois, and that was happening in California, and how, you know, how does the air, you know, travel across the country? And I do think that would be interesting as well, just because it is national news, you know, it's not just localized, and especially because they're more plentiful. So yeah, that's for the wildfires, definitely. And I mean, the tricky thing about the flag program, it's, you know, it's meant to be this educational program, and typically during the school year, the days are green or yellow. And so in the summer, when kids aren't in school, is when the colors would change. So it's meant to be an educational tool, and, you know, the idea is you do these activities, and then you could certainly compare with others of, you know, I wonder what the air quality is in this part of the country, and, you know, why in the Midwest is ours yellow. So you can make it broader than just today, you know, is a green day. Today is a good day.
So I actually had a question. Is it okay to still ask?
Yeah, of course.
Well, first of all, a comment, as far as those horrible wildfires, which are heartbreaking, here on the East Coast, we were even seeing effects. Like, the big phenomenon for that whole week was taking pictures. The sky was like this red ball and this just flat gray sky. It was crazy. Our air wasn't really necessarily unbreathable, but you could see it. And then my other real question is, are you able to get a home sensor, like an air sensor through EPA, to test the air quality around you? Or did I mishear that?
No, it's a loan program. Unfortunately for you, I'm sorry, Donna, we only can send it to our Region 5 states. And I don't think in Region 1, which is the region Boston is known for, I don't think they have an air sensor loan program set up. But yeah, our program is set up so that the 6 Western Great Lakes states, they can borrow it. I think our loan point of contact has it set up so that it's a couple weeks, at least maybe a month, that they can borrow a piece of equipment. And again, it's just particulate matter. It's not ozone or volatile organics or many of the others. But yeah, it is a loan program.
Is EPA also, oh, sorry.
No, go ahead. I was just going to chime in about how much they cost. Sheila, they're typically what, 100 or 200 bucks roughly?
Yeah, and some of the better ones, again, and we have what's called an air sensors toolbox, and we'll share that with Deb so that you can find out more, because what's happening is there's all sorts of air sensors that are coming onto the market, but there's not one way to make sure that they're all doing what they're supposed to be doing. So for instance, the California Air Resource Board has a way of testing. EPA's Office of Research and Development has been testing some of these air sensors. Just to, it's not always equal with what EPA's federal reference monitoring goes, but yeah, we have a list of information on how to assess some of these air sensors.
My very, very last question is, are you affiliated with FEMA at all? Does EPA kind of correlate with FEMA?
We work with FEMA, and I'm going to let Monica and Megan also jump in, but we do have an emergency response group that coordinates in certain and any of the national disasters. We will have a team that responds, and it's directed by FEMA. So I don't personally, I work with a couple of FEMA people off and on for informational purposes, but Megan, I don't know if you want to address further.
No, I mean, I don't work with FEMA folks from the education aspect. While we're both federal agencies, they do focus more on disasters, and I would say EPA doesn't focus on disasters. Sheila said we have folks who help out, but that's not our primary focus. Monica, did you have anything to add?
Yeah, so I don't necessarily work with FEMA regarding, in my asthma role, I have another role where I'm a community lead. And so I'm basically just facilitating or really just checking in with other EPA folks who work with FEMA folks who work in this community that I'm working in for a green infrastructure and resiliency plan. So that's kind of my connection to FEMA. But was there something specific that you wanted to ask about in terms of, what you do?
Are you addressing me, Monica? I'm sorry.
Yes, Donna.
Yeah. Perfect. So Hope works with FEMA for the Youth Preparedness Council, and I'm just thinking both hats. I love the idea of the air sensor, and she has to do a project. So I'm trying to figure out if there's a way she could, and when you said Region 1 and Region 5, I know we're Region 1 for FEMA too. So I didn't know if she could access something like that. And I'm just thinking of her working along with FEMA in regards to an EPA issue, which is kind of cool. So that's what I was thinking.
Sorry, Donna. And as I'm thinking, we actually have worked with FEMA. I have worked with FEMA, and similar to what Monica referred to in the resiliency. And so I know FEMA's been rolling out the student program. And so they connected with us a while back. And we were specifically talking to them how we can prepare schools that get flooded a lot to be part of the mitigation planning efforts that go on. So I guess right now I don't, but I have, and I hope to in the future when, with changing, if work shifts and stuff. But yes, we have. So I had, as I'm talking to you, I'm like, oh yeah, we did touch base with FEMA and stuff.
It's a vague connection, but I mean, I think it really warrants looking into just from our, I'm thinking like as an educator, just from our perspective, because there's such a great correlation tie in there. So you really inspired me. That was very cool.
I may follow up with you because I'm interested in talking to you further about this, because now you're prompting me. For a while, every time we were touching base with FEMA in the past, they'd be able to meet for like 15 minutes and then they were off to, responding to another disaster. So we haven't been able to have long-term conversations with them.
Well, as an aside, if any of you EPA women would like to connect with FEMA, because they're looking even for speakers, this year's summit, they're trying to line up, but next year's summit is always a possibility too. And they're always looking for speakers to come in and educate. This is amazing. This would be great stuff to hear. So,
oh, great.
Yeah, I mean, we could all make that connection. That's really good.
I just also want to make one mention that in the past, I've actually gone into, there have been requests for someone to come into the classroom and teach the students basically what I talked about today. So if anybody is interested in that, once, folks are back in the classroom, I'd be happy to do that as well.
Monica, are you willing to do Zoom calls for teaching?
Sure.
A different hat, 4-H has, I never get the acronym right, but it's just a CES. So it's exploration, career exploration series. Thank you. Why that doesn't stick in my head. But we have like soil scientists come on. That might have even been Megan, while I was thinking I'd spoken to the EPA person here. We're always looking for someone to come in and teach like this. So if you're willing, if I could give your contact information to her, that'd be great.
Yeah, no problem.
And you'd speak to the area. It wouldn't just be one class. It would be to the entire, there's a series of 5 counties in the East Coast that would be a part of that.
Okay.
And Donna, I did, sorry, go ahead, Monica.
Well, no, we can talk more about it later if, if that actually comes about, but go ahead, Megan.
Oh, sorry. So we have another project that I am involved with. There's 2 scientists actually in the Boston area who are doing some citizen science work. One of them was doing something about water monitoring. And so I was looking for superstar EPA scientists. It didn't matter who they were, that could talk to students. And I'm not a scientist, but I'm more a plain language person. And so I know that some scientists are better with teachers and with students, and others cannot speak in plain language. And so so Donna, I think certainly offline, while Monica can happily do it, there are 2 scientists more on the water theme from Boston, super great gentlemen who I've had video calls with to see, can they actually speak in English? And the answer is yes, they can speak in English. And it's not super technical. And so I am happy to link you up with them as well. And they're in, they would be able to come up with examples from your part of the world. And so Deb, we're not excluding them from these teachers. And I can certainly get you information about those 2 gentlemen, but they're super enthusiastic and they've done this. And I think it'd be a good fit for Donna, but it would also be a potential offering for these teachers on a different topic. So.
Perfect. Well, my goodness, that was a pretty cool morning. So here's how, first of all, thank you so much, Monica, Megan, and Sheila for all of that. That was so great and helping us with all the planning. How the afternoon works is you can come back in the afternoon or you don't have to. It's totally your choice. In the afternoon, we're gonna we'll be working with you about unpacking. So if there was a part of it that you wanted to know, how did you do that? How did you make that Google form? What did you think about? Why'd you use that strategy? Whatever it is, we can help you with that. And then also if anybody wants to use time to plan something, then our team will be here to help you plan. It could be something around this particular scientific phenomenon. It could also be something like maybe this triggered in your thoughts, like something that does connect to something you're doing or something that you're knowing you're going to do. And so we can help you with that too. So we were scheduled to come back on at 12. But let's see, how about, do we want to go to 12:30? Do we want to go to 12:15 so it's not too late? How about if I'll just be on here at 12:15, and whoever wants to get back in, you just use the same link, come on in, and we will we'll help support you. Or if you've got what you need and you're good, then it's okay too. So I'll see you maybe in 45 minutes. That sounded bad. Let me stop recording. I guess I should, because then that way we'd have it then you guys could watch it, and we could tell people to end at that, but like then we've got the recording of our ideas at least. Yeah, that would be good.
That's pretty cool.
So then if we do that for cell phones and we focus on lithium, and then from there, you could, maybe kids have an interest to learn more of your elements, right?
Right. Mm-hmm.
And fill that IPS part.
Right.
Then you could either have them comparing models. Like maybe we could find a picture of the old design versus the new design. Like it'd be awesome to kind of, well, they probably wouldn't because it'd be probably trade secrets, but I'm thinking how cool it would be to contact the manufacturer and be like, can we have schematics? They probably wouldn't give us that.
I
to kinda
know
compare 'em.
the Samsung Note that I have, it does have an auto feature where if the internal battery reaches a certain temperature, it automatically goes into shutdown mode and does not restart until it has cooled down. So that
There's your focus statement. Why does
Mhm.
why do Samsung cell phones have automatic shutdowns to, I mean, you'd have to rewrite this, but I'm gonna put it in the chat
Oh, absolutely.
and it's all misspelled. Oh my word, I'm lost. Okay. That would be, so, because then kids would be like, yeah, or maybe it's not even a why do, it'd be Samsung cell phones have automatic shutdowns related to temperature sensors. That's not a question, it's just a statement. And then let them generate those questions.
Right.
And then,
Right.
And then,
That's
yeah,
wonderful.
because of the fact that, and I had no idea. Apparently, I was running another app with another app, and it for some reason started to overheat my phone because it was probably using too much CPU, so it automatically went into shutdown mode. I'm like, huh, that's weird. That's never happened before. But it got so hot at that moment, and then it automatically shut it down. And I'm like, that's a nice feature.
It's a very nice
So
feature.
yeah, and it wouldn't restart until it actually cooled down. So I thought that was really cool. But yeah, it never happened to me before. That was the first time I've ever experienced that. So I'm like, that's a neat design.
Yeah.
Very neat. Alicia, are any of your kids in both your classes, environmental and human anatomy? That's
in both? Oh no, at the moment, no, not at the moment. Yeah, no, they're
so that would be cool.
That would be cool. Yeah.
I do think you could have very similar design for both classes, and maybe just what you change is the evidence you collect. So you'd want to, you could probably do the same phenomenon for both courses, but the evidence and so then you'd have to kind of alter it a little bit, but maybe the evidence you're collecting for environmental science is along the line, well, it could be either of the models, the model we did today could be for either of them, but maybe for human anatomy, you want to have them give you evidence more of the understanding of maybe how the trigger causes asthma, or what happens to the body when asthma happens. I don't know, but you could probably use the same phenomenon and structure it out and use it in both ways. I think that would be pretty cool.
Yeah. Oh, absolutely. Yeah. No, I saw like ties with both classes right away. So I'm like, this will be awesome. So one will be just like the actual like impact of or like the physiological response, if you will. And then the other one would be probably more focused on policy. Yeah, because we really are kind of getting into what sorts of protections or at least should be in place to make sure that we're all safe.
So I don't know if you have political connections, but I know Christina Castro very well. She's our local senator. She'd be the kid senator. She is the bee's knees. And she would love for the chance to talk to your kids. So I think it'd be really cool if you took that angle of medicine, like, some kids, they just don't have access to the medicine that they need to keep, and it'd be for either class. Maybe it's both classes, right? Maybe the class is talking to her about something a little bit differently. Maybe you can bargain some synchronous time with both classes together, talking about different things, but related to this one issue. And then my guess would be that they could either do some research and see if there's any holes in Illinois policy, or frame it from the point of view of like, what is Illinois doing? Like it would propose it to them, like then have Christina Castro come in and say, are there any laws being proposed, or what are the bills in place? Or, that'd be, I think that might be motivating to kids, depending on how you.
Well, absolutely. Yeah.
Yeah, and there's still the issue of social justice, very much so about asthma. So children of color have much higher rates, and they know that it's related to pollution. In fact, that our climate or our change, it is that I put on here, has something about that as well too. So there's that whole equity issue, and what are legislators doing about that, or are they even aware of it?
Yeah.
Mhm.
I wonder if we could make, so when I taught, this was a long time ago, my students were picking whatever topic they wanted. It was an AP class. So I mean, it was just different. But one of my groups picked, they picked transportation related to healthcare. So, and this was probably 10 years ago. I don't know how long Sherman's been out there. The new Sherman. And they literally mapped, they used something to map public access, like bus routes, that kind of stuff, to the hospitals. And they found, they laid out this map, and they found like 2 regions in Elgin that were lower poverty and had no public access to the hospital.
Jeez.
And I don't know what tool they used, but I also know I had, I don't know why we call it this, but I had repeater biology. They call it repeater bio. It's terrible that we call it that. But I had this group of kids that got really interested in, I have no idea how, because they were a rough class. They got interested in trees and what the population of somebody came in and said, "What's a tree city?" And I said, "Well, it's because we have a lot of trees." And they were like, "Well, why does that matter?" And then they started talking about it. And then I don't know how, but they got interested in it. Mm-hmm. So we got in, and it was funny because I didn't even think to do this, but I'm like, okay, well, let's, I think Elgin at the time wasn't a tree city. And they wanted Elgin to be a tree city. So this was a long time ago, I think. And so we were in there doing different research on tree cities. And one of the students, not me, one of the students used, it was when Google Earth was kind of new, or some kind of global positioning thing was new. And they started comparing, they just happened to think to compare cities that were not tree cities and cities that were. And they saw they used the ground cover to show all the different trees. And they presented that to the city council. The city council was like, wow, having that ordinance works, because they had those 2 different visuals, So something simple like that, like if you had some kind of way to have, maybe your in is that way, like maybe you're mapping, maybe you can work with the hospital to get some kind of, like, approach them and say, I just need some kind of public health information on air quality and a map of Elgin or something. I wonder if something like that exists.
Well, yeah, there is. And what they do, though, is that they take these maps. And so some people have done this recently, and I'm trying to think where I just saw it, where they map where are the most trees located. And then they were talking about temperature. So in the poorer neighborhoods where they don't have, so the average temperature in some places was 10 degrees warmer in certain areas that had no trees. And that was also the same areas that had higher rates of medical issues. It also overlapped with the income level, obviously, but there were a number of other factors. And then not having trees, not having access to transportation, having to walk, all of that stuff. So anyway, you can overlap all of those things onto those different districts.
I remember seeing a TED Talks episode about that exact phenomenon, actually, where they were talking about the lack of trees. And like, basically, I spent 17 years in the city of Chicago, and man, food deserts out there. That's
another good one.
Yeah. Yeah, it's bad. And just the temperature difference. And then I can't remember who, but some high school student, I can't remember which school, but she came up with this brilliant idea, proposed it to the city, that maybe rooftops should start, or people should probably start painting their rooftops white, make it more reflective, so that way all of the blacktop material is no longer absorbing the sun's energy. Instead, it's being reflected back and hopefully cooling down the temperatures. I don't know if they ever implemented it, but I saw that and I'm like, ooh, that's brilliant.
Well, and here's
So-
another phenomenon that you could tag to that. Like you could show them that, but then you could talk about albedo and maybe have students look at, well, but then we're putting in the IR light waves, which are going to cause more vibration load, friction in the atmosphere, which in turn would that lead to more global warming regionally. I mean, just like there'd be so many like cool little things that you guys could talk about just with that one phenomenon too. That'd be pretty cool.
Yeah, I could go in so many different directions.
It could.
I think it gets overwhelming. Where do you start?
That's right.
Yeah.
So you just need to start with one simple sentence. I feel like maybe we have a sentence for Laura.